The first time I noticed something was wrong, it was just a faint, bitter taste in the water. At first I dismissed it, thinking it might be due to the pipes or maybe a bit of sediment from the well, but by the next morning, things had taken a terrifying turn. My wife, Emily, was violently sick, pale, drenched in sweat, barely able to stand. And my son, Jake, my little boy, wasn't waking up. His breathing was shallow, his skin cold. My heart pounded as I rushed them both to the hospital, barely able to think straight. Hours passed in a blur of medical tests and worried glances from the doctors. Then, one of them pulled me aside, his face grim. "We found toxic levels of contaminants in their blood," he said. "Are you sure your water is safe?" I felt a chill crawl down my spine. I raced back home, grabbed a sample from the well, and sent it to a private lab for testing. When the results came back, my worst fear was confirmed: someone had poisoned our water. But who? And why? The answer arrived faster than I expected. That night, a crisp, white envelope appeared in my mailbox. No return address, no signature, just a single typed message: "Sell us your land or things will only get worse." I gripped the paper so tightly my knuckles turned white. The HOA. It had to be them. For years they had tried to force me to sell my land, claiming my property disrupted the aesthetic of their pristine neighborhood. But this was something else. This was attempted murder. They thought they could scare me. They thought they could break me. But what they didn't know was that I had been preparing for this. Weeks before, after multiple break-ins and strange accidents happening on my land, I had installed hidden cameras around my property, including one pointed directly at the well. I clenched my jaw and walked toward my study. My hands trembled as I loaded the footage from the past few nights. If they had done this, I was about to see it with my own eyes. And when I did, my blood ran cold. There they were, two figures in the dead of night pouring something into my well. One of them I recognized instantly, the president of the HOA. A slow, burning rage built inside me. They thought they could get away with this. They thought they could silence me. They had no idea what was coming next. This wasn't just my home anymore. This was a battlefield, and I was about to bring the war to their doorstep. I sat in my darkened office, staring at the screen. The footage played on a loop, each repetition tightening the knot in my stomach. There they were, the HOA president and two of his lackeys, standing at my well in the dead of night. One of them pulled out a container, twisted off the lid, and without hesitation, poured a thick, dark liquid into the water. They laughed as they walked away, oblivious to the hidden cameras capturing every second of their crime. My hands clenched into fists. This was it. This was proof. They had tried to poison my family. This wasn't just about my land anymore. This was personal. By sunrise, I was at the police station, the footage ready on a flash drive. I expected outrage. I expected immediate action. What I got instead was silence. The chief of police leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a lazy smirk on his face. He didn't even bother watching the footage. "I'm sure there's a misunderstanding," he said, his tone casual, dismissive. "Maybe you contaminated your own well. Accidents happen." My pulse pounded in my ears. "You think I poisoned my own wife and kid?" He shrugged. "I think you're making accusations you can't prove." And that's when I saw it, the framed photo on his desk. Him, smiling, standing beside the HOA president at a golf course. Everything clicked. He wasn't just ignoring the evidence, he was covering for them. I stormed out of the station, my mind racing. If the police wouldn't help, then I had no choice but to handle this myself. I needed a new strategy. I needed them to think they'd won. So, the next day, I made a public announcement. I posted on the community board, spoke to neighbors, even let the HOA know directly. I was selling my land. I let them believe I was broken, defeated, that their threats had worked. But behind the scenes, I was setting the biggest trap of my life. Because when they came for my land, they wouldn't realize. that they were walking straight into their own destruction, and this time there would be no escape. I played my role perfectly, shoulders slumped, voice defeated, eyes hollow with supposed surrender. The HOA believed they had won. They whispered about my downfall in their meetings, snickered when they passed my property. I could hear the smugness in their voices when they asked, "So when are you moving out?" But behind closed doors I was far from defeated. I had hired someone, a professional, a private investigator who specialized in uncovering the filth that people like the HOA tried so desperately to hide. I gave him one job: tear them apart from the inside. What he found was beyond my wildest expectations. Embezzlement, money meant for community maintenance funneled into private accounts. Real estate fraud, illegal sales of properties they had forced residents to abandon. Blackmail, threats, coercion, people driven out of their homes through intimidation and financial ruin. This wasn't just a corrupt HOA. This was a criminal empire hiding behind a picket fence, and I had all the evidence. I prepared my next move carefully. I wasn't just going to expose them, I was going to destroy them, but they must have sensed the shift. That night I woke up choking on smoke. My barn was on fire, the flames roared into the sky, an inferno consuming everything in its path. Lunged for the door to get outside, to stop the fire before it spread to the house. But when I reached for the handle, it wouldn't budge. The door was chained shut from the outside. My stomach dropped. This wasn't just arson. They wanted me dead. Panic surged through me, but I forced myself to stay calm. I ran to the back, smashing a window with my bare fists, tearing through glass and wood to escape. I stumbled into the yard, coughing, my lungs burning. And in the distance, just beyond the glow of the fire, I saw them. Two figures watching from the shadows. I couldn't see their faces, but I knew exactly who they were. They thought this was the end. They thought they had erased me. They had no idea. They had just given me the final weapon I needed to end them all. I knew the HOA would never stop. Not after they tried to kill me. Not after they watched my barn burn, believing I was inside. They thought they had erased me. That I was just another casualty in their long list of victims. But they had no idea that I was about to end them in the most poetic way possible. I played the part of a broken man perfectly. I let rumors spread that I was finished. That the fire had wiped me out financially. That my family had left, too afraid to stay. I let my house fall into an artificial state of neglect. Overgrown grass, peeling paint, flickering porch lights. The perfect image of a man who had lost everything. And then I made my final move. I reached out to the HOA myself. I sent a letter, polite, desperate, pleading. I begged them to buy my land for a fraction of what it was worth. I told them I just needed to leave, that I couldn't fight anymore. The response was almost instant. They swooped in like vultures, eager to pick apart what they thought were my remains. The HOA president even had the audacity to meet me in person, smiling like a king claiming his conquered territory. "You made the right choice," he said, patting me on the back like an old friend. "This is best for everyone, best for them." I signed the papers with a shaking hand, putting on the performance of a lifetime. I even thanked them. But they had no idea. They had just signed their own death warrant. Buried in the contract was a hidden clause. Legalese so expertly woven into the fine print that their lawyers never even saw it. By purchasing my property, they had also accepted full legal liability for everything associated with the land, including the poisoned well, the fraud and the arson. All the crimes they committed, now they were officially tied to them. And to ensure there was no escape, I had already mailed a detailed package of evidence to the police. It contained everything: the video footage, the stolen HOA funds, the blackmail records, testimonies from terrified former residents, and of course a certified copy of the contract they had just signed. They had spent years evading justice. But now, their names were on the deed. Their signatures were on every piece of evidence. They weren't just caught, they had legally trapped themselves. The first arrest happened 3 days later. The HOA treasurer, who had been embezzling money for years, was the first to crack. He confessed everything to get a lighter sentence, pointing fingers at the president and his inner circle. Then came the fraud charges. The IRS, the FBI, everyone came knocking. And the best part? The land they had so desperately wanted, the land they had ruined lives for, was now a legal and financial nightmare. The poisoned well made it unsellable. The lawsuits from past residents, now emboldened by the evidence, drained what little money they had left. Their prized neighborhood, collapsing under the weight of their own corruption. And I stood at the edge of my property, my real property. Because the land they bought? It wasn't the real prize. My actual home was safe, hidden under a separate legal entity, untouched by their greed. They thought they had taken everything from me. But in the end, I took everything from them. And as the last of them was dragged away in handcuffs, screaming about how they had been set up, I finally allowed myself to smile. Because the HOA was dead, and I had buried them myself. The courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the back wall, cameras flashing as the judge read out the charges: attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, embezzlement, arson. The once powerful leaders of the HOA sat in silence, their expensive suits wrinkled, their once smug faces pale. Every arrogant smirk, every cruel laugh they had ever thrown my way had vanished. One by one, the sentences were handed down. Decades in prison. No bail. No way out. But I wasn't done yet. When the government seized their assets, I saw my opportunity. Using the very money they had stolen from homeowners, I bought the entire HOA, every contract, every property, every rule they had ever enforced. Then, I tore it all apart. I publicly abolished every ridiculous fine, every predatory policy, and every oppressive restriction they had forced on residents for years. The people they had terrorized, they were finally free. I let the community vote on what to do next, and the decision was unanimous. The HOA was officially dissolved. The organization that had once controlled everything was gone. But not everyone was ready to accept defeat. One of the former HOA board members, the treasurer, had managed to slip away before his trial. I had heard whispers that he had one last stash of stolen money, hidden away from the authorities. He had spent years embezzling, skimming off the top, moving funds through secret accounts. But instead of using it for lawyers, he had a different plan. He bought a one-way ticket out of the country. With a fake passport and a suitcase filled with stolen cash, he thought he was about to disappear forever. But just as he approached the gate at the airport, ready to flee justice, FBI agents swarmed him. The cameras were rolling as he was tackled to the ground, the suitcase bursting open, spilling wads of illegal money across the floor. It was poetic justice. I stood on my land that was finally, fully mine. The new I had built shimmered in the sunlight, crystal clear and pure. No poison, no corruption, just fresh, clean water. The HOA had done everything they could to destroy me. They tried to steal my home, ruin my finances, even kill me. But in the end, I buried them instead. And as I took a deep breath of the crisp morning air, I realized something. This wasn't just revenge, this was justice, and I had won.